us what is happening right now in Yemen and who the Houthi militants are.
And what's happening now is it's really political posturing on behalf of the Houthis. They're trying to get leverage to get this draft constitution changed, which they don't agree with. So they've kidnapped the presidential aide, the chief of staff, in order to get that leverage. And then the fighting that we saw in the last 24 hours was also part of that. So the negotiations at the moment are going on for the release of Ahmed Awad bin Mubarak, the chief of staff, in exchange for changing the draft constitution. But the issue with the Houthis were first formed as a movement in 2004. They then fought the government in 6 wars between 2004 and 2010. But they then became part of the Arab Spring. They put down their weapons. They joined the protests. They joined the sit-ins, particularly in Sana'a, and became part of that peaceful movement. But the transition that followed, that was backed by the international community and actually instigated by the US in the first place, did not go their way. So when the national dialogue was concluded in January last year and the decision was made about federalism and to divide the country into 6 regions, the Houthis weren't happy about that. And that was when they started taking territory. So they were pushing from their stronghold, if you like, in Sada, up in the north, which is up by the Saudi border, and they started pushing south towards Sana'a. This was also then an opportunity for Ali Abdullah Saleh to join in, because the Houthis' main enemy is Islah, which is Yemen's equivalent to the Muslim Brotherhood, who'd gained a lot of power after the Arab Spring and a lot of political power. So they had a joint enemy. So between the support of Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis, they were able to take that ground. They were able to beat the Islahi-supported tribes and eventually got to Sana'a in September. And in the space of 4 days of fighting, the Minister of Interior then ordered troops to stand down, and they took control of the city.
When you say the Houthis are engaging in political posturing, do you mean then that they're not trying to carry out a coup despite all this fighting in the capital?
I think it's really hard to determine whether that's the case or not. In September, they had the opportunity to do that. They could have kicked President Hadi out at that point, but they didn't, which makes me think that they probably won't do that now. It depends how far they're pushed. If they don't get their way with the constitution, then they may indeed do that. But I think the Houthis have so far stopped short of actually taking physical power. Again, they could have put their own people up as ministers when the new government was formed at the end of last year, but they chose not to do so because it means that then they are not held responsible for when the government collapses and things go wrong, where they're taking this silent control by trying to manipulate the government, take control inside ministries without actually having their own men in power.
Jeremy Scahill, how does what's going on in Yemen right now, a place you also have spent time in and reported from, relate to what happened in France and AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, taking responsibility for the Charlie Hebdo attack?
Well, you know, one of the things that's interesting, just to add to what, you know, to Iona's analysis, which I think is really spot on, is that the Houthis have been a really interesting political football of sorts in the U.S. policy in Yemen. They've also been bombed repeatedly by the Saudis, you know, Saudi Arabia waging a not-so-secret war, bombing the Houthis. In the WikiLeaks cables, you see that when Ali Abdullah Saleh was in charge, officially in power in Yemen, he would consistently say to the United States, we have to do something about the Houthis because they're being backed by Iran. And actually, to the credit of U.S. diplomats, they said, well, we don't exactly think that that's true. And what was happening is that Ali Abdullah Saleh was a master manipulator of the United States, and he was looking for any way he could to justify getting more military assistance, more money, to bolster his own forces that were supposedly fighting al-Qaeda, to actually use them to shore up his own power base. So when the well was starting to dry up with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula at points, he would then sort of appeal to the United States and say, hey, we have these Iranian agents in the form of the Houthis inside of Yemen. And so what we're seeing right now is that Ali Abdullah Saleh, who actually himself is a Zaydi Shiite and has roots in that region, has now flipped sides and, as Iona said, is sort of the not-so-hidden hand behind some of the power grab efforts of the Houthis. As it relates to the Charlie Hebdo massacre, of course, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is facing a situation in the world where they and al-Qaeda Central have sort of been eclipsed by the rise of the Islamic State, ISIS. And so in this case, it seems like at a minimum, there are ties between the Kouachi brothers who conducted the massacre and AQAP. It's to AQAP's benefit to maximize the way that that group portrays its involvement with Charlie Hebdo. But there are still very serious questions about whether or not, as AQAP says, they financed it and directed it, or that they simply provided some training to aspiring jihadists who went on then to conduct this very, very public, globally recognized massacre.